The psalmist accounted one time that we don't put our trust in horses and chariots and armies. We put our trust in a mighty God. And sometimes, and all the time, God uses people to do his will and to do his work. And you'll get a more formal introduction this evening. But this morning, we're just so thrilled. Rick Allenbaugh is one of those men that God has chosen to use to protect us as a nation. He's given 3 decades of his life, at least, to actually 4, isn't it? That he's a young guy. He's given 4 decades of his life to service to our country. That's pretty incredible in itself. But God has placed him in unique situations, and we could go on for an hour talking about some of the things that God has done with Rick and where he's taken him and allowed him to be. But we felt that it was very, very significant on this day to ask Rick to come and just share some of his insights and thoughts on what happened 10 years ago, what's happening today in our land. And the neat thing about Rick, too, is not just all of his military background and the fact that he's a Rittman grad, and those are great, great things. But he's a man of God with a great heart for the Lord and Savior, and we're just so thankful for him to come and take time out of his schedule. He travels a lot. He's done a lot of moving around lately and drove in yesterday and is able to be with us all day today, and we're just so thankful for that. Rick, thanks for sharing with us.
Thanks, Pastor Bud, and also thank you for your leadership in the community and what you're doing for the service tonight. Can't say enough about our nation in terms of the importance of, one, remembering the incidents that occurred 10 years ago, but also remembering what we should learn from it and what it means to us today. Also, as Pastor Bud indicated, Rittman means a lot to me. I was fortunate to be raised here. I bragged to everybody about the roots you established in small-town America, and it's reinforced by family and friends who came today, and I thank you for that. And also, this coming Tuesday, it'd be 42 years ago. Sometimes I think it's a long time. Sometimes it seems like only yesterday. Jackie walked down this aisle as we got married by Reverend Charles Turner right there. So this church is a building, is God's home, and you as a community means a lot to me personally. And I thank you for the honor. And oh, by the way, it's much larger than what I could bring to you, what we want to talk about today. But let's see if we can get all this high-speed stuff to work here. And I thought I was going to be able to read off the slides back there to cue my notes, but I can't be my eyes. But part of this will be eye charts, but we'll talk you through that. And but I just want to use this as kind of a backdrop for some visuals to help reinforce some of the thought processes that we want to talk about today. And these words are chosen intentionally because sometimes we sit there and wonder why God would let this happen, something like 9/11, and then what are we supposed to do about it? So let's dive in that for a moment. How many think 9/11, the attacks here in the United States, were the first terrorist attack against the United States? I'm glad nobody raised their hand, because this is not a new phenomenon. In fact, now the definition of terrorist attacks are more difficult to even define, because one could argue they're just forms of warfare, trying to make a thought. Now, this is an eye chart. We're only going to talk about a couple of these things, all right? And you can't, I can hardly read it from here, so I know you can't read it from there. But this is just one of 2 pages, and this isn't even all of them. 1920 is the first date you see up here. Then in 1970, I just was reminded the other day, was the first hostile, we could call it a terrorist attack, but it was really trying to make a statement against the war in Vietnam at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. There was a bomb that went off in one of the Army buildings where they did research, killed an individual there. They didn't intend to do that, which was kind of an eye-opener because that was shortly after Kent State. And that was an incident of a terrorist activity trying to make a point. And if you come down through here, there was a whole series of assaults in Lebanon, lots of soldiers killed, Marines, planes that were brought down. As you walk down through here, there's some other things that become, here you see linkages back to Libya when the plane was brought down, killed many soldiers from Fort Campbell. And then here's another attack in New York City in 1993. Then 1995 in Oklahoma City. Now, how do you explain that? Here's the United States citizen, Tim McVeigh, and a crowd, killed hundreds of people at a U.S. facility trying to make a statement against, then it was the killing in Waco. But they took violence to try and make a statement. And so you begin to wonder in your mind, what are people thinking and what are they trying to accomplish by these terrorist activities? Now, if we keep walking down through here, and of course there's Columbine. Now here's another student, killed 13, I think it was, 12 students and a teacher at the high school. And you may recall just recently they were able to dispel another potential Columbine event in Tampa, Florida. They're able to find on the internet some statements by a young man who is obviously bent for destruction. And then you begin to even wonder more in terms of how these random acts of terror in somebody's mind begin to try and make logic to one's thought process. Then, of course, there's 2011 or 2001 on 9/11. We'll talk about that in a fair amount of detail today. And you just keep walking down through this. And recently at Fort Hood, Texas, that was another heartbreaker. Here's a major United States Army, a psychologist no less, who one could begin to argue, does that go back to religious influence or not, on his destruction that he did there and the Army's trying to internalize why this occurred and how do we prevent it in the future. So with that as a backdrop, do you remember what you're doing on September the 11th, 2001? I sure do. I worked for General Dynamics at the time. It was a contractor working for the government. I had an office with a bunch of people there in D.C., but I was home. A week before, though, I'd been in D.C., in the Pentagon, about 2 rows back, outer ring, Z ring, at the meeting there. And Jackie came, I was in the office working on a computer, and Jackie came in and said, I don't know what's going on, but this is not good. And then the events began to unfold. And I'm sure each one of you in your mind can go back to that moment in history, just like those who were around World War II, when in fact the Pearl Harbor attack occurred. You feel violated. You feel insecure. You feel bewildered. You feel, why is God letting this happen? What's this all about? What am I supposed to do? Where do I go? And each individual has their own reaction. Scott Pelley, the CBS News anchor, the other day, they did an interview and asked individuals, how many think about 9/11? And 27% said they think about it weekly. I found that phenomenal, that often. Now, I don't know who the audience was that they're doing the interview with or the survey, but I still thought that was an incredible thing. So from that, I think it's made an everlasting impression upon us, but more importantly, taught us things that we can learn about ourselves and about our nation. That's what we want to talk about today. So let's go back and look at this again. This was a sophisticated event. Started about 8:35 in the morning. Well, it was a little before that, but 8:45 was about when the first incident occurred. That was, as you know, at the Twin Towers. About 15 minutes in between the two attacks, and you can see the number of lives lost. That's probably hard to see for you, but that shows the massive destruction that occurred, and the architect had no earthly idea that the devastation from such a assault on that facade, that building, could be as damaging as it was. Now, the rebuilding of that has started shortly thereafter. In fact, the last debris, which was 1.8 million tons, was removed in November of 06. And correction, that was in June of 02, and the new construction began in about November of 06. As you recall, where the South Tower is, there's a fountain being built that was opened up with the names of all the individuals, and then the new high-rise going in where the North Tower was. In the Pentagon, this is probably the most sophisticated flying maneuver by the pilots, as they were able to bring that into the Pentagon. You see the number of lives that were lost in the plane. and then in the Pentagon. So there's where the fuselage went. This outer ring is called the E ring. This is where the G1, the senior personnel offices were at the time. In fact, the oldest individual killed in the Pentagon was a 3-star general, General Mullen. He used to introduce himself, "I'm General Mullen, I am a soldier." After he was killed in 9/11, his wife had introduced himself, said, "I'm Terry Mullen, I'm the wife of a soldier." And that's just one of many, many stories and the heroes that occurred throughout this day in trying to save people. And now there's a memorial out here, very nicely done. If you ever get a chance to go to the Pentagon, for every individual that was killed, there's a small bench with a little fountain underneath it, a little bit about him. You can go inside there. There's a memorial right here, and you can look through a book that talks about every individual that lost their life that day, either in the plane or actually in the Pentagon. And then, of course, there's the Flight 93. And if you look at the history of this, and I know you can't read this, but took off, fortunately, about 30 minutes after it should have, which gave the passengers an adequate time to realize what was going on. So there's a lot of chatter back and forth between the passengers, their families, and enough for them to realize something was not good. It was about to occur, which then, through the heroism of many individuals in that plane, and now as you heard probably the transcripts here recently, what actually transpired back and forth on the plane and the discussions from the plane to the ground. If you see that it flew, you can't see the map here, but it came right across Canton and Akron as is headed for the White House. And because of the courage of the individuals in the plane, were able to overwhelm the pilot and took the plane to everyone's death before it got to its destination, which everyone believes was the White House by the path it was on. So estimated loss of life, and I don't think we can be exact about this, but nonetheless, a tragic day in our history, and it's important for us to honor these individuals and just as importantly their families. This reached out and touched hundreds of thousands of individuals across our nation and around the world, and also focused our nation on what being an American really means and the threats that are real to our existence today, back then, and what it means to us now. So let's talk about this a little bit. What motivates a terrorist? One of the things that we're overwhelmed with right now is news broadcasts 24/7, and they tend to focus on not necessarily the good news. So in your face, you see a lot of the hatred. So why is that? We're going to talk about that. Is this a religious war we're talking about here? This could be a week-long debate, and we still wouldn't be able to answer that one, and we're not going to go there. But nonetheless, one could argue there's some religious influence here, and not necessarily in God's eyes, but as people manipulate their form of religion to work to their individual benefits. Or is it merely just radicals versus moderates? One could argue that Manuel Noriega was a radical, but he was a very ruthless leader in Panama. When as G2 the 82nd had the privilege to go to Panama and remove him, one could argue he was a radical. But one could more argue that inside religions you have radicals. Terry McVeigh was a radical when you think about Oklahoma City. So, and whom are they trying to exploit? We're going to talk about that too, and the role of education to prohibit and reduce the ability to exploit individuals. And some of it is just inopportunities that some people have with their life. And then what are they trying to accomplish, the terrorists? Let's talk about this a little bit. This is a slide from, it's been modified over time. General Custer from the U.S. Army Intelligence Center of Excellence out of Fort Huachuca. In fact, I'll be out there this next week. Use this, but it's a nice reminder to us about the world we live in. And we hate to admit it, but this is an area of persistent conflict. I mean, back when I look at Lee Swinehart and my dad and the other World War II veterans in here, wars back then had a beginning and an end to them. There was a declared victory and somebody lost. Those days are gone, and what you have now is this constant conflict. What causes this conflict? Many aspects of the globe, and many aspects of civilization, and many aspects of people. And mostly it's people trying to exploit other things. So when you go around this a little bit, you see the competition for resources. I'm going to start there because I think this is going to always become the number one issue as we look into the future. One argues right now we consider oil, some of the other rare earth aspects of resources as dynamic. What's rare earth? Those are small ingredients in our compounds that you have to put inside of the construction or the manufacture of information technology things. China owns 100% of that right now. So that drives the cost up, and it also makes the world look different about rare earth material. But we think oil is one of our major concerns. It is, and it's also one of the ways that the terrorists finance themselves, that and drugs. But water, many argue, will be the resource that people fight over in the future, which tells us take care of your water, our water, everybody's water. Sometimes I think we get a little sloppy in how we think about that. If you go around here, then there's these acts of terrorism that we're talking about, and this is the competition for globalization. And working our way around here, the things that we've been talking about, the rationale, the reasons for the terrorism. It could be about narcotics, which is all about money. Instability, to exploit other things in terms of the youth demands. And then, of course, the Islamic radicalism that we talked about. When we had a world of rational leaders back in the old days, there was kind of a thought process about nuclear weapons. If you had a rational leader with a nuclear weapon, there was kind of this, we'll call it gentleman's agreement. You don't want to use them, we don't want to use them, because everybody knows the mass destruction that would occur to mankind. If you no longer have radical leaders in charge of nuclear weapons, that changes that whole dimension. Makes it a bit more complicated, as you can imagine. And then you work your way around this, and you see down here is the highlight of what this is about. It's a war among the people. Expectations versus reality, expectations versus no hope, frustration, have and have-nots, and we want to talk about that as we go through this talk this morning. So these are folks from Yemen, and we're going to talk about Yemen a little bit, just as one small example of the world, and we're going to get back to that later on. But look at their eyes, and look at their fingernails, look at their hair. These are youth of some of these countries that we're talking about here, and it reminds us, too, that we're a blessed nation. And sometimes we take that way, way too for granted, and that we want to talk about that as we go through this also. So let's look at this is a presentation that talked about the 5 nations, the economic powers, a while back. So this is a couple years dated. This slide only represents, if you will, it was talking about the sea lines of communications, but all those little dots are just places, ideas, snapshots of interaction amongst nations. And you can see the intensity where the green is, and also you can see the paths. So right in the middle of this, let's go and talk about this arc of instability. You can see it goes over the northern part of South America, most of Africa. One could certainly argue that South Africa is in this arc of instability. Across the Middle East, over into Indonesia. And why is this referred to as the arc of instability? The gross national income per country is captured here. This may not be exact, but it makes a point. So if every person in the United States had a fair, equal amount of what the gross capital is, it would be about $44,000 per individual. Now, let's go to inside this arc of instability, where we're going to see later on some other impacts like the age. What you see there is the average income per individual. Now you're starting to see from a global perspective the have and have-nots. Then you go inside of the countries that are haves, and then you have the have and have-nots. This all starts to begin to build frustration and issues. Median age. If this is not exact, that's okay. It presents the point why this is called the arc of instability. Youth brings energy. Youth brings expectations. Youth brings demands. And also youth brings insistence on being part of a future that they find better for themselves. So if you aren't able to make those expectations real, then this arc of instability becomes more unstable. And so how does that play out then with life expectancies? You can see how the arc of instability is starting to build on itself now. Now the life expectancies of some of these places inside this arc are much less than you see on the outer circle. And this is really important. Fertility rates. It takes a nation, we figure, about 2.1 births to maintain itself. Some you can see in Europe and others are below that already. And look at the birth rate inside the arc of instability. What does that mean? More youth, more resource demands, more pressure on the rest of the globe for the area that we're talking about here. So let's change gears just for a moment. I don't know if you heard this term or not. I assume you have. The Salafit is a term back during the days of Muhammad. After he passed on, there was a institution of the Salafit, or of individuals, and their intent was to have religious leaders of a area of the world. You probably heard of the Ottoman Empire. If you overlay over history how that all transpired, you see the Ottoman Empire and the Salafit almost the same. Well, people didn't, after the Turks came in, and Ataturk basically abolished the term back in about 1924. You didn't hear too much about that. Then an individual by the name of Osama Bin Laden came along. Fascinating individual. Very sophisticated in some ways and very bizarre in other ways. His father was Muhammad Aban Awad Bin Laden. Had 10 wives. Well, he had more than that, but Osama Bin Laden was born to his 10th wife. He was Osama was born in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in March of 1957. He was very well educated. He had a degree in civil engineering, public administration, a few others from public institutions. His dad his wealth was estimated around $5 billion as a businessman around being with the Saudi royal family. Osama bin Laden inherited about 25 to 30 million, which gave him some money then to begin to invest in what he found important in his way of thinking, because he had all these degrees, but his focus was religion. And he was a Wahhabi, was a Wahhabi religion out of Saudi Arabia. And if you read about Wahhabism, it's a very devout part of the Islam religion that's focusing on eliminating the impurities and stopping innovation. In other words, go back to the purest form in their definition of Islam. So with that, Osama bin Laden then took the Al-Qaeda as a action arm to begin to implement what he thought was his vision of how the world should be. Now, you all know that Osama bin Laden's last day on this earth was the 1st of May of this year, and his last 10 years weren't very pleasant. In fact, I can't imagine being confined to a small area, hiding from the world, with 3 wives. I mean, one wife would be challenging enough, but being confined with 3 would really be interesting, I would think. But nonetheless, that was his last 10 years on this earth. But when you put that into context, note his influence and emphasis not only on the physical dimension of how he's trying to accomplish his strategic objectives, but also economic. So some argue that this Al-Qaeda effort is going at you with 1,000 cuts. In other words, how do you keep the pressure on? So you have to expend your natural resources to defend yourself. At the same time, you have to give up some resources against natural disasters. Does this sound familiar? And some other things. So this means that we as a nation have to remain very focused and frugal in terms of how we look at things, because Osama bin Laden's vision was to take this arc of instability and turn that into the Salafit in about 25 years. And there's a more radical approach in 100 years, turn that into a Salafit. And we didn't we heard about this before historically, but didn't really pay, I don't think, all that much attention, at least in the public sector, until the Shah was replaced by Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. And now we had one of the national powers who's now a religious leader and a major influencer in the world when you see in terms of the impact of Iran in Iraq, Syria, and other places. So let's break this apart a little bit more. So if you look at some of the things that it's global instability and global austerity right now, you can kind of walk around what you read in the papers constantly right now, what you see. One is our own debate here in the United States. What do we do about the national debt? What do we do about our high unemployment? How do we make sure that we don't create a nation of have and have-nots? How do we make sure that it's all fair in terms of what we're trying to accomplish? The $2 to $3 trillion invested in the wars overseas, making sure that we are able to pay that back. All the challenges you see our nation faces. This competition around the world for the resources we talked about. You can all see that. Some debate the price of oil is way too high. Well, if you go to Europe, it's $69 a gallon right now. They've been doing that for years, and they're just part of life. But the other part we have to remember, you heard me say that part of the oil is part of the resources required for the terrorists to carry on this larger requirement, and certainly food. And we're seeing that right now in our nation. All that you go to the grocery store, see the prices going up right now across the your food groups, no matter what you consider, whether it be bread or certainly corn. And then we think we have challenges. European challenges are more complex. The Eurozone has made it to the point that you have and have-not nations. Those that are the haves, read the Germanys, and some of those that are more fluent in their economic stance, refer to Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain as the pigs. And that's intentionally sarcastic because their economy is so poor and their unemployment is so high and they continue to spend, and then the other countries have to bail them out. So there's a competition inside of Europe right now. And then the recent rioting in England, the leadership said, how could this happen? These are just criminals. Others say, well, these are youth that are now fed up with the expectations that they have on high unemployment and no future vision of how their life is going to be better for them. Then certainly you see the events in Greece, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and the al-Qaeda sanctuaries. They used to be just in Afghanistan with the Taliban and Pakistan, but now you see them establishing in other places. So this is just one small snapshot. Remember, the arc of instability goes over here and off this map. Here's Libya. That's ready to go into some type of change. The change is already occurring, but we don't know really what the change is going to entail when the new government has stood up. Egypt, that huge United States financing of Egypt and the overthrow of the leadership there. And then there's still expectations have to be met in terms of how the new society and government stood up. Here's Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, and both sides of it. The huge influence by Iran, the Shia, on Iraq, and from the Sunnis in Iraq, Iran and Syria. And you know about Syria's killings of their own people right now as they try and quench that rebellion. And then here's Yemen. And of course, you know about what goes on in South Africa with the starvations right there right now caused by a lot of the own internal tribal warfare. So let's just look at Yemen for a moment and look at the strategic location of this again. All the oil comes through here. We have a U.S. forces in Djibouti. About the pirates coming out of Somalia intercepting ships and the Black Hawks Down that occurred there during the first President Bush's watch. And then this being a breeding ground for al-Qaeda up through here. Just some facts about Yemen. And these are a couple years old, but if you look at all the nations, it's about 150 out of 177. Average income of about somewhere around $2 a day for about 42% of the people. High birth rate. Look at what the youth have to see. Remember, their average age there is around 19. Ours is 37. University graduates about 180,000 a year, and yet job expectations for about 16,000. So you can begin to see the frustration that occurs, and this makes it a logical breeding grounds for terrorists. because what terrorists look for are the frustrated, those that are not well educated, and those that think there's a better life by reacting to what the terrorists want to accomplish as their undefined future world that surrounds us. So what you see there are increased of chaos and all the other challenges you expect to see in a society, and then, as I mentioned, this recruiting ground for terrorists. So this new era of globalization, new players, there's new competition, there's new rules of the game. We have to take into account, as you all know, all the impacts as we look around the world, because our world is so interwoven right now. And that's not all bad. We've always believed that democracies don't fight democracies. And economically, if you depend on other countries, you don't want to distract nor disrupt that relationship. But you have to be very aware of what this all means. And this new system that we're looking at globally is not settled in yet. You know, every economic change that occurs has impacts around the world. So what can we do? First of all, we have to remember the basics. And I like to go back to this book. I've referred to it many times. Had a chance to study under Morris Janowitz at University of Chicago for a semester up there for graduate school. He was a private in World War II, and even though you have the right of being a U.S. citizen by being born to U.S. parents or being born in our soil, that doesn't mean citizenship is free. And he believes, and so do I, that the way you earn your citizenship are three basic principles. One's voting. And if you look at our turnout in the United States, sometimes it's not that good for our community elections and others. So voting's your way of contributing to your future in terms of who your elected officials are. Paying your taxes, sometimes, I'm certainly not in this audience, you try and get by with the minimum taxes you have to pay. So we have accountants, we have all kinds of help out there to make sure we pay our fair share, but certainly not $1 more. And there's a competition about taxes all the time. But anyhow, that's the way you earn your citizenship. That's the way you contribute to your future. And then by serving. And Morris Janowitz is very clear. This didn't, of course, he believed in the military service, but he also believed that serving could be by your community, your local hospital, going down to other places in the South, helping the places there that need to be rebuilt from Katrina, or other camps for church groups, and et cetera. And I think Thomas Paine said it quite well in this picture in terms of, if there may be trouble, let it be in my day that my child may have peace. So that's all about, I think, what Morris Janowitz was talking about. So understand what makes our nation strong. When I went to the Army War College in Carlisle, it's kind of like the PhD level work for some of the military officers to get an opportunity to attend. There was they call it the three-legged stool. And we spent as much time on the other two legs other than the military might as we did on the military part. And we tend to forget that. But our nation is built on the will of the people. That's our democratic process, what we stand for in terms of our representation, what we see here, eagles of strength, our flag of our nation, the beauty of our country with the backdrop of the Christian belief. The will of people, you could kind of reside in that presentation there of what you see up here. Our economic power, which we try and leverage as much as we can, but you can see within the economic world, the globalization that we're faced with right now, your economic power is a lot of it is confidence in investments, your ability to produce, your skilled labor, and the other ability to exploit natural resources, and of course our military power to protect our way of life. What did the terrorists try and attack on 9/11? Our economic power, that would be the New York City towers. They did attack our Pentagon to represent the military power, and because of the courage of the individuals in the airplane, they didn't get to the White House, which everybody believes was the focus of that third attack. So what makes up the will of our nation? It's the understanding of our roots, our history, what makes us what we are. We're a multicultural, multidimensional nation. That's what's made us strong. That's the appreciation and the attitude toward each other so that everybody knows that you're working on this together. A common language. English is our common language. We need to be able to speak it coherently and properly. English should be your pride. I don't know if you've ever been around French or even Koreans. When they dialogue with each other, there's always an excitement in their voice in terms of their appreciation for their language. Sometimes I think we take our English language and abuse it. And I think that's not right in terms of what we need to be able to do for what makes up our will of a nation. Bound for a cause. A cause can be many things, but the cause of what you all stand for, having a cause is important. And that cause in terms of the betterment for our people and our nation is what makes us strong. I can't say enough about education. You heard me say that terrorists trying to exploit the uneducated. They intentionally suppress women. If you're in Afghanistan, you're the two safest professions are one, being a doctor that takes care of women, and the other is being a veterinarian. You can see where they care. The veterinarian take care of their food, and their women for reproduction. So when you think in terms of that, but they also suppress educational women because they don't want them to become too educated, or they'll begin to question why they don't have all these rights, etc. So our education is what raises us up and makes sure that we can have the comprehension to counteract the attempts of some of the individuals in terms of our way of life. Respect for others, that's worldwide. Understanding one another is a big dimension of our country that we continue to get better at. Sometimes we become so internally focused, we tend to forget about the multicultural, multi-dimensions of this world. This global economy, you really can't afford that. But that's part of the strength of our nation in terms of its respect for others. And certainly our confidence in our government. You can't say enough about confidence in terms of what makes a nation strong. You have the ability to contribute to the future. You have confidence in your future. You have confidence in your surroundings. And you have confidence in your fellow man. And then a foundation based on spiritual faith. One nation under God. That's what made us strong, and it's what will continue to make us strong. We have to be very conscious of any attacks against that. So, as Franklin Roosevelt said, those of you who can't read it, the true goal we seek is far above and beyond the ugly field of battle. When we resort to force, we know we must. We are determined to do that force that shall be directed toward ultimate good as well against the ultimate evil. We Americans are not destroyers, we are builders. That's what makes our nation what it is. So I like to go back to another old philosopher, Maslow. He started his thoughts about 1943, published books in 54. But I think we tend to jump beyond this lots of times. We want to get down in the exotic right portion, or down in here, when really a lot of the requirements that we're dealing with in this globalization, the challenges that the terrorists work on, are the psychological. That's putting food on the table, having a safe place to stay, and certainly being able to have a secure and safe environment, and take care of your family, where there's love, there's relationships, there's the confidence that you can then move to self-esteem, where you're contributing to your community, contributing to your nation, and then last is the self-actualization, where you've got the problem-solving ability. Well, we tend to concentrate sometimes in these nation buildings way down here, when the real requirements for Maslow's hierarchy of needs are over here to the left, the physiological and the security and safety. So the will of our people is under attack. We have to be conscious of this. And some of it it's kind of subtle. We'll call the first one information technology. That's my job right now with the government. And there's two categories. There's we'll call it the information technology immigrant. I'll call that my dad. He doesn't want anything to do with computers, but that's okay. You know, his life wasn't built around computers. And then there's the information technology native. That's the young kids that are growing up nowadays. I mean, they can multitask. They can have a social media going on, Twitter or Facebook or Skype over here, be talking to 2 or 3 folks over there, doing their homework here, all at one time, like it's second nature. So there's some good and bad. You have access to all this information, that's good. It's also bad, because what you tend to do then is begin to lose some of your social skills if you're not careful. Remember we talked about the English language? Have you ever watched the kids talk on their texting? I have no idea what they're talking about, but I know it's not English. And I also know that they're losing social skills because they'll be sitting in a social setting texting each other versus talking. And we, as people, we as a nation, have to have this eye-to-eye contact, this interaction of people. And you can see the exploitation of social media. Look what happened in England. It helped in Greece, but in England it was bad because the youngsters that are out there that were causing all this damage were texting each other saying, the police aren't here, go to this corner and cause this damage. So they turned it off, and then of course there's this exploitation. It's not going to change. I mean, information technology is changing more rapidly. So we, as a culture, as a nation, have to understand how to use it to our advantage and not make it an attack against us. 29 million people use dating servers on the internet. I find that fascinating. I don't even know what that means, but I do know it's fascinating. But that's the impact of information technology. And cyber warfare, trust me, every day we depend more and more on the network, as you well know, banking, our infrastructure, our power, you name it. It's vulnerable to attack. There's 30 to 40,000 People's Liberation Army folks. That's their mission. That's how to exploit the warfare. We stood up the recent Cyber Command, General Keith Alexander. That's to help counteract all this. But this is all part of this issue about the impact of technology we have to be aware of. It's both an attack and it's a builder of us in terms of what we mean by that. We can't lose our moral compass. The Ten Commandments aren't suggestions, and sometimes we tend to waver away from trying to make things relational. And it's easy to become self-serving. Sometimes it's our country sometimes is built on stuff. I find stuff intriguing. You grow up, go to school, you want to have a good job so you can buy stuff. The more stuff you buy, the more you worry about the stuff. As you get more stuff, you have to buy insurance to protect the stuff. If you lose the stuff, you have to worry about getting the stuff back. The more stuff you get, the more it costs. You worry about getting. So you can see stuff is kind of a intriguing part of our society. But if you're not careful, those stuff will begin to control you. And our government says buy stuff because that helps stimulate the economy. Well, Paul talked about that too when he's talking to both the church of Philippi and Timothy. And he talked in Timothy. And these are two translations I enjoy, and one is really going back to the Greek. But the theme of it there is you have to be a little careful, because if you let this idea of stuff, read that money, you can then begin to see your nation and you as an individual succumb to the influences where you put your health, family, community, nation at risk, just focused on the self-actualization from money or stuff. What do the terrorists hate in the United States? They hate our strengths. They hate what we stand for. They don't know what they want, but they know they don't want what we have, and they don't know why. But if you look at Osama Bin Laden's surroundings, he had a television, he had a computer, he had all the stuff that we provide, but he didn't like that stuff. But that's what he said anyhow. They certainly don't like our vigilance, our ability to stay steady, stay focused, stay on what makes our country strong, kind of what you see right here. Our state of well-being, our concern for mankind, our willingness to stand for a cause, our willingness to serve, and our way of life. And that's kind of like the Rittman that I remember in terms of football and friendship, riding your bicycle around town. That's the stuff that they just can't comprehend how that could be so good, why they can't have it, and why they try and suppress people, yet not having a good future what they want. This has not been cheap. We talked about the loss in 9/11, but over the last 10 years, we've had 6,229 individuals killed, and that was as of 7th September. A little over almost 5,000 killed in combat, 41,000 plus injured, and every community in America has felt that. Certainly not as the mass killings and destruction that we saw in World War II, but it's brought back home to us. And last time I was back for the World War II veterans recognition was also something that terrorists can't understand, how we could be so respectful of great Americans, some refer to as the greatest generation, which I believe. Back here in Rittman, it was a great day. I had the chance to come back and introduce Dad to the community. But while I was there, I met Staff Sergeant Jason Winkleman, and he told me about his brother who was killed on the 20th of September 2009. Damon Winkleman, graduate of Loudonville High School. He was a medic, and he was on his way to respond to a firefight that had occurred, and his vehicle hit a pothole, flipped over. They were both killed. It was in the Humvee, but that stopped the convoy. They found out up above there was a bunch of IEDs set for land mining, which probably destroyed the whole convoy. Played football, played basketball. He was in a band, jazz band and marching band. Member of the Lutheran Church. He loved the outdoors. They said there wasn't a tree or an animal he couldn't identify. His favorite place was was by his lake, by a house by his lake, where he lived in Lakeview, I believe it was called, in Ohio. And also Carolina Beach in North Carolina. So when I was up here for the recognition ceremony of World War II, his brother came up and took his name tag off and gave it to me. He said, please put this in the water by Carolina Beach in honor of my brother. His other brother was also in the military. So it's 3 brothers out of that family serving. 500 people showed up for his funeral. And this is what the terrorists don't understand. What he meant to his community, what his community meant to him. Week before last, I was down in Tampa for a week conference. And they brought a soldier up on the stage. And this is just one of the 45,000. And that's not even a realistic picture. Specialist Hernandez was a signal non-commissioned officer. In 2006, was hit by improvised explosive device, which you can make for $25 now in Afghanistan with agricultural products. Anyhow, his vehicle was demolished, lost his leg, burned over 67% of his body, lost his eyesight, his hands are deformed, face is deformed. Standing up in front of the audience after this young lady did a wonderful tribute for him, all soldiers, through the eyes of a soldier, is her song. And he's there with his mom and dad, and they talked about the literally hundreds of surgeries he's gone through. And he stood there still with that bright smile, wearing his uniform, with his deformed face, hands, and it brought tears to your eyes. I mean, this is America. So what should we do? Maintain our faith, maintain our confidence, maintain our worship and serving our Lord and Savior. And we, as a nation, have to remember the importance of that. Remain alert and also aware of our surroundings and destination as an individual, as a community, as a nation. Part of the reason that the flight did not succeed and crashed into Pennsylvania because the passengers were alert. Our guard was down in September 11th of 2001. We were a little bit sloppy at our airport procedures. We were a little bit sloppy at other things. We're not sloppy anymore. People pay attention, and that's part of your responsibility in terms of how what we should do to prevent future actions. Our nation is built in the family. Family relationships are how we teach, mentor, set the right standards, grow, and depend on one another. It starts there. And sometimes I think with the challenges we've had to the American families, it makes it that much more challenging. But as close as we can to come back to those roots helps us for the future. And display a positive, skilled workforce. There's challenges out there, as everybody knows, in terms of the unemployment rate, the reskilling of America. But that's a challenge that we face with is we have to focus on to help us, to get us moving forward in terms of how America is going to be retooled for the future. And most importantly, remain calm and steadfast. Read an article that talked about what should we do as a nation and what should we remember as a nation. One, if you can't read this, it says, terrorism is aimed at creating terror. The antidote is a nation that refuses to be terrorized. While we must not let down our guard, neither should we allow ourselves to be manipulated into excessive or counterproductive reactions to such events. That means don't be overwhelmed, kind of like the mayor that said this week with the advertised threats that could occur. We're going to continue on. Terrorists don't control how we live. All citizens are informed partners in combating terrorism, as we just talked about. And a strong society does not overact or abandon its core values in the act of defeating terrorism. It's very easy to succumb to challenges or temptations to get away from your core values with the response that is thought to be appropriate against terrorism. It's a fine line you have to walk there, and if you're not careful, your core values will be threatened. And as we consider the possibilities of our future attacks to our home soil, let's present the terrorists with a united front. As we stand together, as it's represented right here, and as our pledge says, and when you really take this to heart, when you put your hand across your heart, it says, I pledge. And our founding fathers understood that. Our flag represents what we just talked about. I pledge to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic, that's all of us, and that's to our history, that's to our founding fathers. That's to what's made us a nation. The republic of which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank God for our founding fathers. They gave us a pledge. And when you say that pledge, it kind of brings it all back home to what we do in terms of what 9/11 meant in 2001 and what it means today. And the strength of our Americans, as we see the flags around our nation, we see the number of ceremonies that are going on as we speak, and we see our 4th of July, and our nation over time has been pretty good in terms of picking out national holidays in terms of what they stand for, from religious to national to honoring those that have served. And I thank God for what we have. I thank God for all of you, and I thank you for your sincerity and your appreciation and belief in our country and what 9/11 meant for us in both 2001 and today. Pastor Bud.
Thank you so much, Rick. What a great reminder of our God and what he has done for us and established in our great nation. This is a privilege, isn't it? Not everyone is blessed like this. It was God's choice to place you here at this time, and we need to stand firm in our faith for him. Let's have prayer, and then I'll dismiss you in just a moment. Lord, thank you so much for establishing a land that was based to promote Jesus Christ, to promote freedom, to promote liberties of all sorts, equality of all sorts. And we believe that your word has surely founded this land and has been the foundation of this land. We believe that it is you and your word that will give us the strength to go forward as well. Thank you for this day. We pray, Lord, that not only will it honor brave men and women, but it will honor a great God who has led us. Help us to live for you and to bring glory to your name in all we do. In Christ we pray. Amen.